Hi and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is where we talk about what's going on with media, technology, communication, culture, and pretty much any area that might be connected to that, primarily from a point that identifies how theory might influence our thinking and how we might respond to it. And of course we introduce you, our audience, to academics, theorists, who are not always academics, as it turns out, and community activists, journalists, and so on. So tonight I'm delighted to welcome Ricky Crano to the studio. And Ricky's from Tufts University, and I think you're the first guest we've had on Boston Media Theory from Tufts.
Oh, wow.
That's a first.
It's an honor. Yeah.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Ricky. And you're in the Science, Technology and Society program.
In the English department, yeah.
In the English department at Tufts University. So there's, for those people who aren't necessarily aware of how university programs and departments work, a program is usually subsidiary to a department. So science, technology and society often is, as we've suggested, subordinate to other interests and other concerns in the university. I know it's very big at MIT, but you're here, so let's talk about what this thing called STS, Science, Technology and Society, is and how you understand it before we get on to the more detailed aspects of your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating kind of interdisciplinary field that is that I think I've found a nice I found to be a kind of accommodating home for the kind of critical theory. I mean, I consider myself a critical theorist above all else. I mean, my main concern is the good old culture industry. But I think that STS has given me a good provides a good home for me because what I do kind of straddles philosophy of science and technology, history of science and technology. But I myself am neither a philosopher nor a historian. I do discourse analysis and rhetorical analysis of media and visual culture, and I think that there's there are interesting kind of overlaps with STS. And in my teaching, I teach media studies and digital cultural classes that draw and my research, but teaching and research draw a great deal from STS work that's that's thinking about kind of the sociology and anthropology of scientists and technologists and thinking about kind of tracking kind of the life of our technologies from the moment that the rare earths are pulled out of the ground to the moments when these devices are recycled and decaying toxically and
right.
far off part of the world.
Right. So there's a couple of things just to follow that up with. One is the idea, which may not be obvious to everybody, that when we add the word society to, let's say, technology or to media or to social media and society, what do you understand that to mean, to do? Because it seems to be a sort of trope that is sometimes left unbothered.
Yeah, I think for me, what it does most or best is that it takes us out of thinking just kind of individual or personalist kind of relationships with technologies, and allows us to think about our technologies as embedded in much larger kind of social and socioeconomic, especially kind of systems. And again, I'm interested in everything from the the moment of extraction through the production of technologies to the materiality of the infrastructure, and thinking and questions around ownership and propriety of the infrastructures. Again, all the way to the demise of the devices and the recycling and the work and the labor that that occurs at every stage of this of this process. And I think that's the social element to these technologies, that these technologies are embedded in and that they embody. And this is I think every time we engage with our smartphone, for example, we are kind of implicated in this much larger kind of socioeconomic system. And I think that's the society of STS. That's what that does for me anyway. I mean, I think many people approach it in many different ways. But.
Sure, and you and I met just fairly recently at the Cultural Studies Association conference in New Orleans, and I was thinking also that this has an important cultural component, right? In the terms in which we might think of Raymond Williams suggesting that culture is a way of life, how we live, and increasingly as I think you and many other people have noted, but you as a theorist have noted, we live, as it were, through our technology, increasingly. So that's the way of life, right? That's is that the cultural studies kind of connection, or is that too vague?
No, I think that's really nice, and that's actually a very helpful way for for me to think about kind of what I'm thinking through in terms of technology as again as a way of life. As the media theorist Mark Duez has a nice line about media being to new media especially being to us as water is to fish. This is media is something that we live in, that we can't live without.
This may sound a little banal, but it's also one of those things where when you, for example, where I work at a university here in Boston, we had a power outage and everything stopped, because the simple fact that when there's no electricity, there's pretty well nothing happening because there's no network. It was quite stunning, and it was a short amount of time, and people were up in arms and felt quite lost.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable what a power outage can do, or a network network outage, or just the way that just a couple of days ago a Twitter outage for a couple hours makes national headlines the next day. I think that the outage itself becomes a sort of spectacle, which is fascinating.
It is fascinating
and troubling, perhaps.
Yeah. Now, over the last couple of years since you finished your dissertation and moved to Tufts, you've been talking about wealth, media theory, and the kind of questions to do partly with the network, technological network, in which, as you've suggested, we're embedded, and which, if you like, describes and defines our everyday life and the culture in which we live. But you've also talked quite a bit more specifically about social media, specifically the connection of social media with this rather curious fish called neoliberalism. And I say curious fish because it can be all things to all people, yes, and not very well or adequately defined in some cases. And what I think you've done in some wonderful work over the last couple of years is to really approach neoliberalism by articulating it to media and to social media and to the way we live. So I wanted to ask you about this sort of notion of neoliberalism and how it plays out, and how you've tried to explore it in some of the theoretical work. Let me just read the title of this wonderful paper of yours. The title itself is fantastic. It's called "The Real Terror of Instagram: Death and Disindividualism in the Social Media Optic Field." Is that right?
I think that's close enough. Yeah,
it's close enough. So I think anybody who can link terror with Instagram or terror with social media is, well, in my own humble view, on the right track.
Well, thank you.
So let's see how you can help us to understand this connection between neoliberalism and the sort of generation, if you like, within your definition of it, and then this connection between terror and social media.
Yeah. No, I think. Well, let me take the latter part first, and just to kind of maybe brush it under the rug, but to say that I was kind of taking terror from Roland Barthes' great book on photography, Camera Lucida, and,
yes,
and my own work was kind of analyzing social media, kind of photography and photographic culture specifically, in light of kind of some of his comments and his feeling of terror at the kind of this kind of terror of looking at oneself in a photographic image, and thinking about the ramifications of that through social media, image culture, or maybe the demise of that even a little bit, or how that terror kind of gets displaced or affected in different ways. But to talk a little bit more generally about the relationship between neoliberalism and social media, I think is I mean, first of all, as you put it, neoliberalism is a curious fish.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and means many different things to many different people, and or depending on their disciplinary orientations or the political persuasions. But I think to me, in my work, I've tried to make a few different points of connection. But in general, I'm interested in again, as you more or less said, the ways in which neoliberal ideals and rationalities become embedded in or embodied by or otherwise kind of actualized through our media cultures, our new media cultures, and particularly kind of social media cultures. So for instance, the ways in which one important kind of aspect of neoliberalism on my reading, and again I'm reading it as kind of commensurate with the kind of post-Fordism and financial movements towards kind of financialization, deindustrialization. But again, I'm interested in it even more so as an epistemology and in the kind of the historical development of neoliberal thought, starting around the middle of the 20th century, and one kind of vital aspect of that is entrepreneurialism and this notion of kind of treating everyone and making everyone feel that they're an entrepreneur of themselves. So you kind of operate your own self as a sort of enterprise or a corporation. It's kind of the inverse of the corporate personhood trope. Now it's the person, the incorporated person or something, something like that. But
so sorry, just to clarify. So in a sense, you're referring to the U.S. Supreme Court that said that a person is the same as a corporation, or a corporation is the same as a person.
Corporation is the same as a person. Right. Yes.
That sort of is that the.
Well, I think it's kind of the inverse. The inverse of that. Now the person becomes an enterprise, so that we start kind of calculating our activities in a way that kind of best promotes our brand. And I think that Instagram and YouTube are particularly kind of ripe places to look for for this sort of thing. If we think about kind of the influencer culture on YouTube and Instagram, and the ways in which this these platforms afford and kind of incentivize us to think about ourselves as as entrepreneurs, as kind of people who have identities that we can brand and promote and publicize to this to this network of friends or of followers. So that I think that that kind of self-entrepreneurialism is one important aspect of neoliberalism. The elements of competition I think are interesting, and elsewhere I've looked at kind of Bitcoin and the ways in which Bitcoin in addition to consuming the energy equivalent to the entire country of the Netherlands on a daily basis, it incentivizes competition, this massive proliferation of competition at the level of accounting, and I think that this kind of spirit of competition that is essential to kind of the neoliberal ethos is kind of embedded here in this other kind of digital technology that I think Bitcoin, that is that we could consider social in some in some respect, and other things I've looked at are kind of Google, the ways that Google search, for example, kind of models neoliberal social epistemologies, and the ways the conversion of knowledge into information, and elsewhere. Yeah.
Well, the most practical way for me of thinking about it is this idea that in the sort of perfect neoliberal world, you're on your own, and everything is up to you. So what you can make of yourself, as it were, is the sort of notion of ideologically, the state won't do anything for you, maybe your family will, but the individual unit is what you are capable of. Now that seems to me to run into some real contradictory challenges, because we've also got to live, right? So what's the point at which, if you like, the dialectic of having to be motivated in order to survive and live and get up every day and do things? So that's a form of self-management. And then what particular turn or moment there was where neoliberalism said, we'll take that and we will then give it a different name. We won't just call it human life, getting up and getting going every day.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you correctly, this question of kind of just the cutthroat, kind of ruthless nature of kind of hyper individualism and neoliberalism. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that there's a twist, an interesting twist though, especially kind of given my interest in new media and social media, thinking about the ways in which kind of the classic kind of model of the individual is itself kind of long gone. I mean, Adorno said it was long gone in the middle of the in the middle of the 20th century. This kind of bourgeois 19th century notion of the individual who has kind of a private life, who functions rationally. I think that and I think if we look at the ways, and I've done a little bit of work on thinking about the ways in which as individuals we become kind of sliced up into series of sets of traits and preferences, and the ways in which say algorithmic kind of recommendation systems, which are one of the ways in which one of the predominant ways today in which corporations know who we are, or and how we know who we are. The ways in which kind of we're fed different kind of cultural artifacts. Our news comes to us through algorithmic recommendation. Our music, our movies on Netflix. And these are things that aren't treating us as individuals, right? Google says they're not kind of surveilling us as individual persons, but they just have these kind of composites of us, right? Or Facebook will tell you the same thing. Cambridge Analytica will tell you the same thing. And this is very interesting to me, because this is the philosopher Gilles Deleuze said in the early 90s that we're no longer kind of individuals but dividuals, he said. So there's something about that, the completeness of that, the in the individual that is being kind of cut short today. And I think that the way that we engage with media has a lot to do with it, and the way that media kind of treats us and establishes knowledge about us. And and actually, to go back to the question of neoliberalism, I think the financial sector does the same thing in something like a collateralized debt obligation, which kind of slices up thousands of loans and in all these different ways, and organizes them into tranches that investors can buy into, and not knowing kind of whose loans these are. The person there, the family there has no has no impact or no relevance here. So I think that the individual itself, while neoliberalism does have this this kind of ruthless, you're on your own kind of ethos, at the same time the individual themselves no longer matters. And Gary Becker says this too. Gary Becker, one of the kind of most important kind of Chicago school economists and microeconomic theorists, developed this theory of human capital theory in the 60s and 70s, and his idea ultimately, which won him a Nobel Prize, was that any human behavior that operates according to some sort of kind of marginal utility can be accounted for by economic analysis. And this is, I think, one of the great kind of triumphs of neoliberalism in the social sciences, especially. And this is something that kind of comes back to that STS question. The ways in which kind of neoliberal thought has itself kind of winnowed its way into the social, into the social sciences, in this way. So Becker says that anything can be accounted for by economic analysis, and I think that, but at the end of the day, for him, it's not about the understanding individuals. It's about understanding aggregate patterns, and this is the same thing that Google will tell you, the same thing that Facebook will tell you.
And presumably that then translates very clearly and quickly into a kind of market fundamentalism, which really is a mirror term for neoliberalism, which is you're only relevant if you meet some sort of statistical or sort of positivistic measure.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And that And I think that that's one thing that's kind of troubling. One of the the oft kind of proposed solutions politically right now is the universal basic income, and I think that one of the as great as many aspects of that that can be, one of the troubling things about it is that it just invites more again more participation to more participation in new media systems, socioeconomic systems, which is to say more data generation. So again, we are there's also kind of a small wages for Facebook kind of a movement that I think is ultimately kind of wrong. Misses a lot of the point. While we are kind of generating data and generating revenue in every kind of click while we're on social media. Just turning that into a wage has some problems, I think, and also kind of obviously kind of perpetuates our participation in these in these exploitative economies.
And in some ways we're in a very difficult position, because what's the way out? And what is the way out of a system that is so heavily algorithmized that we find it almost impossible to have valuable, communicative and humanistic interactions without those machines? Sorry, and it's only early. I mean, it really is. It seems to me. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think for all of us who think about these things, it's a massive challenge, isn't it?
What's the way out? What does resistance even look like?
It's a bit like a conversation I had with, or was in a meeting with somebody who was proposing a new way of thinking about how we train students, college students especially, for work. And it was just work. And I raised the question, well, what about if you don't think of the only future as being about work? There are fairly simple ways to imagine that there might be different possibilities.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And the question of even resistance is a very difficult one. I think that. I'm fond of Walter Benjamin's line about his kind of revolutionary kind of utopia, if you will, looks just like looks identical to this world, but everything has changed just slightly, and that's one kind of option for what it looks like. Is it really does look the same, but something changes in the mindsets of everyone. Maybe I think more radically something needs to change in our socioeconomic systems and that we're participating in every day.
Sure, and I think it's been fairly well argued by a number of people, starting with maybe Professor Negri and Michael Hart and maybe Fred Jamison also, that there really is we're pretty much at the limit of what we can tolerate in terms of just a continuation. I was reading an interview with Chomsky today, similar kinds of points, that really the denial of climate change can be seen as being an extension, if you like, of our integration into social media. So we're just encouraged not to see how precipitous our survival is. So what are you going to do?
Right, and I think that climate change might be the way out, because that seems to be the most immediate kind of existential threat that can possibly get us to kind of rethink everything about the way that we live, including our habits of consumption and our media use, the way that we communicate with each other. That's
right. You mentioned, and I want to take you up on this, and with the time available, we can't do any justice to it at all, but I just want to refer to Jacques Lacan, and you referred to, and you used or made some references to him and to the sort of psychoanalytic tradition within this sort of discussion of what happens with the image when we're looking at the image in social media. and having gone from or moved from a fairly static idea of a photograph, which we look at, to an endless array of images, and how this sort of Lacanian notion of just not being able to locate ourselves against anything that might be alive as a single photograph to reflect on gets us to a different point, Lacanian point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think for Lacan, I think his concept of the gaze is very important to understanding kind of how he understands subjectivity and how we ourselves kind of form as as subjects who are capable of kind of being seen in this in this way, or just visible in the world in this in this way, in a way that kind of we can be seen by another and and react to that. But I think that you're absolutely right to say that for Lacan, this there are these moments where we're kind of confronted with an image that's so strange and startling that that we're forced kind of out of ourselves for a moment, and that is vital to kind of to subjectivity as he sees it. And I think that I think that involves a certain kind of capacity for reflection and for kind of stillness and dwelling with with a photograph or a painting. He's more interested in paintings himself, but yeah, I think that the way that we kind of flick through our photo feeds, I think is really important to think about just the gesture and just the this constant scroll, this constant movement of these images, and the fact that these images are never themselves static, always susceptible to being modified and changed, whether it's kind of simply putting a filter on it, but more kind of recirculating in different in different ways. And I think that there can be power in that. I think memes can be very powerful kind of critical tools from in certain situations, and can be startling and and kind of force us outside of ourselves in certain in certain ways. But I think that something something important gets lost when we're no longer kind of dwelling with something that can kind of force us to kind of recognize this sense of otherness and to feel Derrida talks about feeling ashamed in front of his cat, and I feel like there's something when he's naked in front of his cat, and I think that there's something similar going on with Lacan's feeling, kind of having this kind of gaze kind of bearing down upon him.
Well, and the complicated idea now in our relation with social media, a Lacanian notion of desire and of what we want, and neoliberalism, just to finish up really on this point, neoliberalism saying, well, you can have it all. As you as an active individual, just here, have whatever you like, and here's all the different forms of social media that will give it to you.
Yeah, and the irony, of course, is that it's no longer about physical commodity consumption, but we can still we still have a culture industry nonetheless that's that's kind of instantiated in this in this digital realm. And I think that's something that that warrants much more inquiry, for sure.
It does indeed, and I think that what I can say quite confidently is that your work seems to engage in a sort of breadth of theoretical inquiry that is very helpful and exciting. So I look forward to seeing more of what you've got to do, and hope that we can maybe talk again about what happens with STS and where it goes here in Boston and elsewhere. So thanks, Rick, for being here.
Thanks for having me. Love to come back.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
So that's all from me, from Marcus Breen and Boston Media Theory. Until next time, keep on mediating.